You know how life can feel sometimes? Like everything's on autopilot, moving along predictable tracks, day after day blending into the next until you barely notice you're just going through the motions. That's exactly where I found myself at 59 years old. I thought I had everything figured out, thought I understood my place in the world, thought the story of my life was already written with no plot twist left to surprise me. My name is Carolyn, and for years I believed my relationship with my son Michael was exactly what it should be. We were close, or at least I told myself we were. We'd talk on the phone weekly, share the occasional dinner, exchange the usual pleasantries about work and weather and what was happening in our separate lives. Everything felt comfortable, predictable. Safe, but comfortable isn't always the same as connected. When Michael first suggested we take a weekend trip together to a cottage in the countryside, I'll be honest, I wasn't exactly thrilled. My friends had been urging me for months to do something like this. It's a wonderful opportunity to reconnect, they'd say with knowing smiles. I'd nod politely while thinking they didn't understand. My husband Thomas had been gone for 3 years, and I hadn't felt much like traveling since then. The house had become my sanctuary and my prison all at once. Michael was 32 now, fully grown with his own career and his own complicated life. We hadn't spent extended time together, just the two of us, since he was probably in his early 20s. Part of me wondered what we'd even talk about for an entire weekend. "It would be good for you, Mom," he'd said on the phone, his voice carrying that gentle concern only a child can have for their parent. Fresh air, change of scenery. We could both use it. And there it was, the part of me that had spent decades putting everyone else's needs first, the part that never wanted to disappoint, the part that couldn't say no to my son. Before I'd fully processed what I was agreeing to, I'd said yes. So we packed our bags and headed to the countryside. Michael had found a small cottage nestled in the hills, the kind of place where you can actually hear yourself think. It was rustic without being primitive, exposed wooden beams, a stone fireplace, large windows overlooking rolling green hills that seemed to stretch forever. Far enough from the city to feel like another world, close enough to remember the one we'd left behind. We arrived as late afternoon was melting into evening, the sun painting everything in shades of amber and gold. The air was crisp and clean in a way city air never is. Michael had handled all the arrangements, booking the place, planning the route, making sure we had everything we needed. I felt a surge of appreciation for his thoughtfulness. He'd always been good at anticipating what others needed, sometimes before they knew it themselves. We carried our bags inside and settled into the space. The silence was different here, not empty, but full somehow. Full of possibility, maybe. Or maybe just full of all the things we hadn't said to each other over the years. I felt awkward in a way I hadn't expected. When was the last time it had been just Michael and me with nothing to distract us? No family gatherings, no holidays with extended relatives, no errands to run or tasks to complete. Just time, just us. That first evening, we prepared dinner together and ate by the fireplace. The flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, while the scent of burning wood filled the room. We talked about surface things at first. Family news, his work projects, my garden. He asked about the trips Thomas and I had taken before he died. And I found myself telling him about our anniversary trip to Scotland, how we'd gotten hopelessly lost in the Highlands and laughed about it for hours. Michael listened with complete attention, nodding and asking questions, and for a moment it felt like we'd been transported back to when he was young, sitting at the kitchen table while I told him bedtime stories. But then, in the quiet that followed dinner, something shifted. Michael cleared his throat, a small, nervous sound I recognized from his childhood. I looked up from my tea, curious. "Mom, there's something I've wanted to talk to you about," he said, his voice carrying a hesitation I didn't often hear from him anymore. I set down my cup, suddenly alert. "What's on your mind, sweetheart?" He shifted in his chair, fingers drumming against his mug like he was searching for the right words. "It's about us. Our relationship, I mean." A small frown creased my forehead. "What about it?" Michael paused, choosing his words carefully. "I've been thinking a lot about how things have been since Dad died. How we kind of settled into a pattern, you know? We talk, we see each other, but it's like we're both just going through the motions. I feel like we don't really talk anymore. Not about real things. Not about what actually matters." His words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples through everything I thought I understood. I was caught off guard. Michael had always been someone I could depend on, but I'd never realized he'd been carrying these feelings around. I didn't know you felt that way, I said quietly, feeling something catch in my throat. I'm sorry. I know I've been distant. I got caught up in my own grief and I didn't realize I was shutting you out. Michael's expression softened. It's not about blame, Mom. Nobody did anything wrong. I just miss the way we used to talk. Really talk. I miss knowing what's actually going on with you, not just the edited version you think I want to hear. He was right, and the realization hit me like a wave. Our conversations had become scripts we recited from memory, safe, superficial, carefully edited to avoid anything too raw or real. We'd both been tiptoeing around the empty space Thomas had left behind, trying to fill it in our own ways, but we'd stopped reaching for each other in the process. I missed that too, I admitted, feeling tears prick at my eyes. I think I forgot how. And just like that, sitting by the fire in that small cottage, I understood that this trip wasn't just a simple getaway. It was an opportunity to reclaim something precious that I hadn't even fully realized I'd lost. A genuine connection with my son, the kind that goes beyond roles and obligations and reaches into the messy, beautiful truth of who we actually are. As the night deepened, we talked in ways we hadn't in years. We laughed until our stomachs hurt, cried about things we'd never voiced, shared fears and hopes we'd kept locked away. There was something profoundly healing about it. Like setting down a heavy burden I'd been carrying for so long, I'd stopped noticing the weight. I'd thought this trip would be just another weekend, another checked box on the calendar of my life. But it was becoming something else entirely, the beginning of something new, something I desperately needed but hadn't known how to ask for. Over the following days at the cottage, Michael and I found ourselves creating new rhythms. The heavy silence between us transformed into something lighter, filled with actual conversation, small observations, deep questions, comfortable quiet that didn't need to be filled with noise. Mornings began slowly. We'd make coffee and sit at the small kitchen table, watching morning mist roll across the hills like a living thing. We'd sit in companionable silence, and then Michael would ask me something that made me really think, not just about the past, but about who I was, who I wanted to become. Mom, he said one morning, his voice thoughtful, what's something you always wanted to do but never got around to? I had to pause. At 59, I felt like I'd done most of what I'd set out to do in life. Marriage, motherhood, a career, a home. But when I really examined the question, I realized there were dreams I'd tucked away so long ago I'd almost forgotten they existed. I always wanted to learn pottery, I said, surprising myself with the answer. Throwing clay on a wheel, creating something with my hands. But I never made time for it. There was always something else that seemed more important. Work deadlines, family obligations, household tasks. Michael looked genuinely interested. Why didn't you? Life, I suppose, I said with a small shrug. You put yourself last enough times and eventually you forget you have your own wants separate from everyone else's needs. That's sad. Mom, he said softly, and something in his voice made me look at him more closely. You should have done it. You still could. His words resonated deeper than I expected. This wasn't just about pottery. It was about the way I'd gradually erased my own desires from the equation of my life. And here was my grown son, telling me I deserved to exist as more than just mother, more than just widow, more than just the supporting character in everyone else's story. Maybe you're right, I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it yet. We spent that day exploring the countryside, walking along dirt paths that wound through fields and forests. The autumn air smelled like fallen leaves and wood smoke. Sunlight filtered through the trees in golden shafts that looked almost solid enough to touch. It was the kind of perfect day that makes you forget the rest of the world exists, the kind that reminds you what peace actually feels like. By evening, we were sitting on the cottage porch, watching the sun sink below the horizon in a spectacular display of orange and purple. Michael had brought out a bottle of wine, and we sipped it slowly, savoring the moment. I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt this calm, this present in my own life. You know, Michael said, breaking the comfortable silence. I've been thinking about what you said last night, about how we haven't really talked like this in years. I turned toward him, interested. And, I think. We fell into silence again, but it was different now, warmer, more connected. Something was shifting between us, something deeper than the mother-son relationship we'd always had. We were becoming something more, two adults learning to see each other clearly, to support each other through the messy business of being human. That night after dinner, we sat by the fireplace again. The crackling wood was the only sound in the cottage, and the space felt intimate, like the world had contracted to just the two of us. "I'm glad we came here," I said softly. "This trip has given me so much more than I expected. It's making me think about things I've been avoiding for too long." Michael smiled, and in the firelight I saw him not just as my son, but as the man he'd become, someone with his own wisdom, his own experiences, someone who had something valuable to teach me. "I'm glad too, Mom. I think we both needed this. A chance to remember who we are beyond all the things that have happened to us. To just be ourselves with each other." It was a simple statement, but it held profound truth. This trip wasn't just about reconnecting. It was about rediscovering who we were, both as individuals and as family. As the fire burned low and night stretched around us, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. I wasn't the same person who'd arrived here days ago, and neither was Michael. We'd both changed, but in the best possible way. We were learning to understand each other again, in a way that felt more authentic and meaningful than ever before. The trip wasn't over yet, and I knew we still had ground to cover, but for the first time in 3 years, I felt something I'd thought was lost forever: hope. Hope about life, about my relationship with Michael, about who I might still become. Our remaining days at the cottage passed like a dream, as if we existed in a pocket of time separate from the regular world. Michael and I continued our pattern of deep conversation interspersed with comfortable silence, and the more we talked, the more I realized how much I'd missed this kind of genuine connection. One afternoon, we walked to a nearby pond, following a winding path through stands of trees and over a small wooden bridge. The sky was crystalline blue, and when we reached the water's edge, the surrounding hills reflected perfectly on the still surface like a painting. We stood there for a while, simply absorbing the peace of the place. "You know," Michael said eventually, "I've been thinking about that pottery class you mentioned." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, I think you should do it," he said firmly. "I'm serious. You've spent your whole life taking care of other people. Dad, me, your parents. You deserve to do something just for yourself. Something that makes you happy." I felt emotion well up in my throat. It was exactly what I'd needed to hear but never thought I would. I'd always known Michael was a good son, but in that moment I understood just how well he really knew me. How much he wanted me to be happy, not just functional, not just okay, but genuinely fully happy. "You really think so?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded emphatically. "Absolutely. You've always been creative. I remember your sketches and the way you'd arrange flowers, the care you'd put into everything. You never gave yourself credit for it." I smiled, feeling warmth spread through my chest. "Maybe you're right." Michael stepped closer, his expression earnest. "I'm not just saying it to be nice, Mom. I really think it would be good for you. And I'll support you however I can. When we get back home, let's actually look into classes. Promise me?" The overwhelming gratitude I felt in that moment brought tears to my eyes. He wasn't just my son. He was someone who saw me as a complete person, someone who wanted me to thrive, not just survive. It was that realization that finally cracked the protective shell I'd built around myself after Thomas died. I'd hidden behind the labels: widow, mother, caretaker, and forgotten that I was also Caroline, a woman with dreams and passions and potential still unrealized. We stayed at the pond until the light began to fade, then made our way back to the cottage. I felt lighter than I had in years, as if acknowledging those hidden dreams had somehow made them real again, had given me permission to want things just for myself. That evening, as we sat down to what would be our last dinner at the cottage, I felt a complex mix of emotions. The trip had been everything I hadn't known I needed. I'd come here thinking it would be a simple escape, a quiet few days with my son. Instead, it had become a journey of healing, rediscovery, and growth. As we ate, Michael looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I'm really glad we did this, Mom. It feels like we've come full circle somehow. Like we're both in a better place now." I smiled, feeling my heart swell with love and gratitude. "Me too, sweetheart. I think we've learned a lot from each other this week. About ourselves, about each other, about what really matters." He nodded, his expression growing more serious. "And I want to spend more time with you. Not just on trips like this, but in regular life. I don't want us to slip back into that routine where we're just checking boxes. I want us to keep talking, keep sharing, keep growing together. Relief washed over me. I'd feared that in the years since Thomas's death, Michael and I would drift apart, that our lives would continue on separate trajectories with only superficial connection. But now, looking at him across the table, I knew that wasn't going to happen. We were moving forward together. I want that too, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I think we can make it happen. I know we can. As the evening stretched on, we shared more stories and laughter, and I realized how much I'd missed truly living. I'd spent years grieving, years lost in sorrow, and I'd forgotten what it meant to embrace life fully. But now, with Michael beside me, I was starting to remember. This trip wasn't just about reconnecting with my son, it was about reconnecting with myself, with the parts of me I'd forgotten or abandoned in the wake of loss. It was about learning to live fully again, to find joy in the present, and to look toward the future with hope instead of fear. The next morning, as we packed to leave, a sense of peace settled over me. I didn't know exactly what the future held, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I wasn't alone. Michael loaded our bags into the car while I took one last look at the cottage that had been our sanctuary for these few precious days. The hills stretched out in the morning light, and I breathed in the clean air one more time, wanting to hold on to this feeling. "Ready, Mom?" Michael called. "Ready," I said, and I meant it. As we drove away, I looked out the window at the countryside passing by, but my mind was on what lay ahead rather than what we were leaving behind. There would be pottery classes to research, conversations to continue, a life to actually live instead of just endure. Michael reached over and squeezed my hand, and I squeezed back. We didn't need to say anything. We understood each other now in a way we hadn't before, not just as mother and son, but as two people who'd found their way back to each other after being lost for too long. The trip had changed both of us. I'd arrived at that cottage as a woman stuck in grief, going through the motions, convinced that the best parts of life were behind me. I was leaving as someone different, someone ready to embrace possibility again, to create new memories, to live with intention and joy. And I was leaving with something even more precious, a renewed, deeper connection with my son. We'd peeled back the layers of routine and obligation and rediscovered the genuine love and understanding that had always been there, just waiting for us to pay attention. As the countryside gave way to highway, then to the familiar streets of the city, I felt no sadness about returning home, because I wasn't returning to the same life I'd left. I was returning as a different person, ready for a different kind of life, one where I showed up fully, where I pursued my own dreams, where I stayed connected to the people who mattered most. The cottage had given us the space we needed, but the real journey was just beginning. And for the first time in 3 years, I was genuinely excited to see where it would lead. Sometimes life surprises you. Sometimes a simple weekend trip becomes the moment everything changes. Sometimes you rediscover what you thought you'd lost forever, and sometimes the person who helps you find your way back to yourself is the one you've known their entire life, your own child, now grown, now wise, now ready to walk beside you, not just as someone you raised, but as someone who can help you grow too. That was the gift Michael gave me at that cottage in the countryside. And it was a gift I'd carry with me for the rest of my life.